Baseball, the real UN. Hi everyone, this is Will O'Toole welcoming you to another edition of Park Ridge Sports History. Good news and bad news. The good news is we're going to focus on baseball, and particularly the All-Star Game, and especially the 1968 version of the Midsummer Classic. Bad news or sad news, we're going to take the summer off. We're going to take a little summer vacation, Howard and I, but we'll be back in September with brand new material, more sports events, issues, controversies on the major sports. Of course, we come back in September with college football and pro football kicking off, the baseball playoffs and World Series. And then really, when you think about it, come October, we're going to have the NHL and the NBA, and of course, college basketball with another season. So there's plenty of action in the fall. We're just going to take a few weeks respite and relax a little bit. We can prepare for the fall. But I wanted to focus on, obviously, my favorite sport, baseball. And of course, one problem I'm having with baseball right now is that, and we are going to talk about the All-Star Game. In fact, here's my editorial about the All-Star Game. I really think baseball, I know they always say it's the halfway point of the baseball season. Technically, it's not. Usually the teams have about 90, maybe 95 games already played. I would actually like to see this. I would like to see baseball, and I've said this before, have their All-Star Game at the end of June. Why? Because the end of June, here's what would happen. You have the end of the NHL and NBA, which occurred about the third week in June. I think the NHL finally outlasted the NBA and ended on, let's say, June 24th. Then, of course, baseball's by itself for about 2 weeks. You got the 4th of July. You usually have the All-Star Game. But the problem is, when the All-Star Game is over, we are blitzed, no pun intended, by football. So you're talking about baseball having a very narrow, it's really a shame. And I kind of blame baseball for this. But baseball only has a narrow gap now where it's all about baseball from about the last days of the NBA and NHL playoffs until the All-Star Game. So I would propose this. I'd love to see it ended at 81 games, then have your All-Star Game. And in fact, what I would do is I would play it on a Wednesday, with the idea being the players are off, or you play until Sunday. You're off Monday and Tuesday, play Wednesday. You're off Thursday and Friday, and you start Saturday. Or keep it the traditional Tuesday night, but be off Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and start with a Friday night game. Or even, how about this? Everybody plays Friday afternoon. And we return a little bit to how baseball was played when many of our grandparents and parents were watching the game. How great would that be? That everybody starts fresh, and there's no real excuse. Oh, we have to have it, at night because that's when, all our customers come in, our fans come in. Hey, this is the middle of summer. In fact, when you think about it, in the South and probably other parts of the West, summer began for those kids on basically June 1st. So now they're 4 weeks in. And here in the Northeast, we're about a week and a half into the summer for the most part. So there's no excuse about having to get up for school the next day or not having enough fans in the ballpark. Not only that, it's a Friday. It's not like it's a Wednesday afternoon. And in fact, my claim would be this. Well, if it's such a loss of income for baseball to play all their games after the All-Star Game on a Friday afternoon, then why do they have Wednesday afternoon games? Why do they have Tuesday afternoon games? The Businessman Special, it starts at 12:30, which I love, but it doesn't match. Play the game Friday afternoon. And if you wanted, I guess, you could negotiate this maybe with the players and all the rest of it. Have double headers on that Friday afternoon and have 4 games be played in those 3 days. And what I would also do is this. Probably right before the All-Star Game and probably right after the All-Star Game, I might expand the roster by about 2 players. And the reason being is this, or actually, yeah, right before the All-Star game, get the new players kind of like baptized or inculcated into the team at the major league level. Why I would do this? So maybe June 25th, you can expand your roster by about 4 players. Why? Because now you play the All-Star game and you start with that Friday. And I'll just say single game started at 2 o'clock, right? Started in the afternoon. Can even have fireworks after, or you could start at 5 o'clock technically, end the game at 8:30, and then have fireworks if you needed to. And then what I would do is this: now you have all of July just devoted to the regular season, to the pennant races. Why? Because July 31st creeps up on a lot of teams, and those extra 3-4 games, and I know you're stopping at 81. Now it's, let's say, 25 games, so you're talking about 106 games. You still got a third of the season to go. But in those 25 games in July, it would be the make or break for baseball. Now you go into July with 125 games at the end. You have the last 2 months of the season, 50 some odd games to play. But that whole month of July is devoted to regular season baseball. There's no breakup of the season between the All-Star game and all the rest of it, because I have to be honest with you, and selfishly I say this, I love when the All-Star game's played about July 9th, July 8th. I hate when it's played from anywhere after July 12th, and the reason being is, and it still happens, I do a countdown, and when the All-Star game is over, I feel like summer is over. Now having it at the end of June, I feel like I have all of the month of July and August to just celebrate regular season baseball and all the rest of it. I don't have that break for baseball, because I'll tell you, in July, when you're just getting into it, they have the break, a couple of days off. And man, it really can affect you if you're a big baseball fan just getting into the game because of business and school and all the rest of it. But that's what I'd like to see. Ended at 81 games. I mean, you're starting the season in March. What's the big deal? Go to 81 games. Now you have a half season. Play the games end of June. Now you have all of July, August, and September to devote to nothing but the pennant races. And of course, with July and what baseball has brilliantly done, that July 31st trade deadline, moving it from way back June 15th now to July 31st, there is a lot of excitement, a lot of intrigue, a lot of fun being a baseball fan as that July 31st deadline encroaches on either the pennant contenders, the pennant pretenders, or the teams now looking to discard some players and regroup and get better for next year and in the future. So that's what I'd love to see. Last week in June, All-Star game. July, August, nothing but baseball. All right? And with that, I want to go over the 68 team, my segue. Now, the 68 game, I know a lot of people, including myself, never really intrigued by it. In fact, I devoted a whole show to the 71 All-Star game. Had about 24 future Hall of Famers. It's not the record. There was another year, I think, that had 26. That was an All-Star game, maybe in the 60s or something like that. But that 71 All-Star game really sticks out for me. There were 6 home runs, all by Hall of Famers. There were only like 2 or 3 other hits in the game, not by Hall of Famers, but by good players. Mercer and Willie Davis come to mind. But in that game, you have Bench, Aaron, Jackson, Robinson, who actually had the game-winning home run. As I was redoing this, Robinson had the game-winning home run. Then you have Harmon Killebrew, and of course Roberto Clemente, his last home run in an All-Star game, or his last hit in an All-Star game, I believe. His last home run, though, was hit in Tiger Stadium, 1971. And actually, as I said before, Mickey Lolich, who was the real hero in the 68 World Series, made or pitched the last outs in that game, played in Tiger Stadium to give the Tigers, the American League, their first win since about the 1960s. And that's what we're going to discuss today. Now, 1968, I just want to tell you this. Here's why the 68 game is not seen as so much fun, not a lot of intrigue and all the rest of it. There was only one run scored. Yes, it was by the great late Willie Mays, who scored it in the very first inning, and it wasn't even anything all that great in terms of, it wasn't like on a home run or anything like that. Willie Mays was 1 for 4 in the game. Here's how it occurred. Willie Mays, in the bottom of the first, single to left. He gets second base on an error by the pitcher, who is Louis Tiant. Actually, let me show you this. Louis Tiant, who was the ERA leader in 1968. Just for the fact, McLean had a 1.97. I think Louis had a 1.67 ERA. But it was McLean and Gibson who won the MVP and the Cy Young Award. They didn't even get into this game. In fact, Gibson, I think, was warming up, if I remember correctly, might have been warming up in the 9th inning. Okay? So Willie Mays, on a pickoff, moves to second. Then there's a walk to Curt Flood. Let me get these guys up here. This is great to see. These are some of the players. I'm going to go over some of the players with you here. I know I was fast with that. The only one here is Ron Reed I want you to focus on. He was actually a 68 rookie card. Some of the other great ones, Tom Seaver, Juan Marichal, Billy Williams. And, of course, I got this one, the home run leaders. Because it had Aaron, it had Willie McCovey, Ron Santo, and, of course, the great Jimmy Wynn. I was doing some studying on Jimmy Wynn. Great player. Unfortunately, all 4 of them have passed. 68 batting leaders, you have Rose. And I got this one because Matty and Felipe Alou both made the 68 team, and they finished 2 and 3 in the batting. Actually, Rose hit about 335 that year. He had a pretty good year hitting. It was one of his 3 championships. Of course, Rusty, Don Drysdale, the starter for the National League. I think Drysdale has the record for most starts. He's got like 5 or 6. Rusty Staub, of course, in that great Astro uniform. Julian Javier, or Julian. I used to remember being called I pronounce his name Julian Javier, but it's Julian Javier, who was a good second baseman for those great Cardinal teams of the 60s. Tony Perez, Steve Carlton, of course, on those 68, 67 Cardinals, and Tom Haller. Now, Tom Haller was a catcher known for his defense, not much offense. Again, he was a victim, or you could say an example of 1960s baseball. Not a lot of home run hitting, not a lot of offense, a lot of defense. And that is why a guy like Johnny Bench, I'll get to him, why he was such a significant player in the late 60s, because he brought back offense to the catching position, all right, that probably hadn't been seen. And, of course, I'm probably talking through my head right now, but probably the offense hadn't been seen by a player of his value since probably Yogi Berra, maybe Elston Howard. But you got to go to like the Yankees of the 60s, Campanella of the Dodgers in the 50s. But baseball with catchers, there was a huge drought, really a huge dearth of offense in the 1960s from catchers. But there's Johnny Bench, his rookie card. There's Louis Tiant, one of my favorite uniforms for the Cleveland Indians. I just love that uniform, the vest, the logo, the number. Carl Yaz, lowest batting average ever to lead the league in hitting. He hit 301. I always thought Ted Eulander was second. It's a great trivia question. It's actually Danny Cater. He was the only other American leaguer who hit 290 or above, and Cater hit 290. Ted Eulander finished fifth in the batting average title that year and hit 283. And I just remember him playing for Cincinnati Reds as a role of DH. And here is Rod Carew. Mickey Mantle in his final All-Star appearance didn't start, played first base, and struck out, unfortunately. But these are some of the players. Jim Fregosi is a better player than his statistics indicate. He is, you could say this. I saw a study on him by a Sabre guy. Never thought much of Fregosi until this guy convinced me. Fregosi had some really good numbers. I know that we've talked about WAR, that his WAR was pretty good, if not superior to some of the ball players at the time. He was not playing on good teams. Of course, he came up with the Angels, was not playing in a hitter's paradise, Angel Stadium, but he was nonetheless a good player. I remember him from 1970. He probably had his greatest year ever. Hit 22 homers. I think he had about 75, 80 RBIs. Did play in the All-Star game in 1970. Jerry Grote was the starting catcher for the National League in the 68. Now, Grote is an example of what I mean. Not really a good hitter. Lifetime, I think, 252 hitter, but was able, because of his great defensive skills, his great ability to call a game, was able to last quite a few years in the major leagues. I think he might even had like 18, 19 years in the major leagues. First came up with Houston, one of the great deals for the Mets, trading for him. He bounced around after he left the Mets, played with the Dodgers on 77 and 78. I don't think he got into the playoffs, or maybe he got into one or two playoff games with those teams. It was still on those pennant-winning Dodgers teams. Then he went to Kansas City, but he didn't play on the World Series team. But just to give you an idea how long he lasted, you're talking about from the early 60s, about 64, 65, all the way to about 83, Grote. And that was the only position I ever remember him playing, was catcher, so you know that. Hawk Harrison, who led the league in RBIs with 109. And then Don Wirth, who came into the game hitting 200. He did hit 12 home runs that year in 68 for the pennant-winning and World Series world champion Tigers, but he was a all-star with a 200 batting average. Dwayne Josephson, one of two White Sox to make the squad. Again, Josephson and Joe Askew were emblematic of the type of catchers in the early 60s. And, of course, that's where Bench really changed everything for baseball. And, of course, I'm being prejudiced. I love Bench. He's my favorite player of all time. And, of course, you have the three great Hall of Famers. You're not even thinking about it when you're saying great and you're saying elite. How elite? Top, arguably 5 all time. Aaron, Mays, Gibson. Gibson had that incredible. I always tell you this, and I've said this before, it always makes me mad that Gibson only won 251 games. For some reason, I thought he should have won more. In fact, I feel like I was cheated because he was such a great player. Now, my brother Eddie sent me an email about Rod Carew. How wild is this? Rod Carew, of course, Rookie of the Year, 1967. Who else was Rookie of the Year? Tom Seaver, 1967. When Seaver won his 300th game against the Yankees, pitching for the White Sox, Rod Carew hit his 3,000th hit that day. There was an amazing number of coincidences between on that day that Seaver won his 300. It's just incredible. And a number of players on the White Sox would later be Seaver's teammates on the 86 Red Sox. Kind of wild. But what stands out the most for me is that Seaver and Carew were both Rookie of the Year in 67, and then they both reached milestones as a hitter and a pitcher, respectively. Carew with his 3,000th and Tom Seaver with his 300th on the same day. And, of course, I got some more guys here. Now, Gary Bell was a all-star pitcher for the Red Sox. Pitched for the Red Sox in 67, and, of course, you know me talking about Gary Bell from his year with the Seattle Pilots in that great book, Ball 4. And, of course, Tommy John, we've talked about him before. Leo Cardenas, who on his baseball card seen as Chico Cardenas, made it. He was a shortstop. He gets traded and to the Minnesota Twins, and the Reds got back a couple of good players. And they got back a relief pitcher, and now I can't remember his name. And it wasn't Hawk. It wasn't the Hawk, Clay Carroll. They got him from Atlanta. And I'll probably Wayne. I want to say Garrett. It's not Wayne Granger. They got in the deal for Leo Cardenas, and of course Cardenas would play shortstop for the Twins. Good players. John, of course, John Odom, aka John Blue Moon Odom, pitched not only in the or made the 68 team, but also started the 69 game in Washington. Pretty wild, right? 69. All-Star game in Washington. All right, so I've given you a host of guys. Rick Monday, of course, one of the first. I think he was the first draft pick, 1965, in baseball history. He, along with Sal Bando and Reggie Jackson, formed quite a core at Arizona State. And, of course, he is famous for saving the American flag from being burnt when he was with the Dodgers in May of '76. Two people ran onto the field at Dodger Stadium. Two knuckleheads tried to burn the flag, and Rick Monday, a former Marine, came over and rescued the flag. And, of course, Bert Campaneris, one of the few men to play 9 positions in a game. And Woody Fryman, a man who was traded for Tony Perez. And how ironic is this? Both Perez and Fryman were on the '68 National League team. And, of course, they would be together as part of a trade later on. And, of course, the managers, Dick Williams and Red Shaney's. One guy, I don't know why, I can pronounce his name okay, but I can never spell it. Long name. Of course, Red Shaney's was a star, I think, in the 55 or 57 All-Star game, was a second baseman for the Milwaukee Braves way back in the 50s. Good player. And Mel Stoudemire, I help you out, you Yankee fans. Here is the Rookie of the Year for 1968. It's Tommy Helms, who defeated in the voting Jerry Koosman. Now, interesting thing here about Koosman on that '68. Everybody forgets him. It's Nolan Ryan who makes that card so valuable. And I have seen a pristine, a mint 1968 rookie card. I've seen it in the hands of friends of mine who had that card with Nolan Ryan, and it is one of the most valuable baseball cards you can collect. At the time, this had to be 30 years ago. I think it was selling for $1,500, maybe even $1,600, whatever you can get for it. But I know that everybody wanted it for Nolan Ryan. But Koosman really was a good pitcher. All right, so let's go to this '68. The reason why I bring all this up is that if you notice, there are some guys. I'm going to go over the list. So here's what happens. I'm going back to Mays. Gets a base hit. Gets the second when they try to pick him off. Louis Tiant tried to pick him off. It causes an error. There's a walk to Curt Flood, and that's how this flood of pictures is what I started to do. Willie McCovey hits into a ground ball double play, but on the play, Willie Mays scored. Hank Aaron walks. So Louis is a little rattled in the first inning. Gives up 2 walks. And then Ron Santo grounds out short to first. That's it. That's the entire scoring in the game. Drysdale comes in for his second bit of pitching. He gave up, actually. Jim Fregosi actually started the game with a double to left field. Then it was a ground out by Carew. Yaz had a pop-up, and then Frank Howard had a line-out. If I do see that, it's a pretty good shot by Frank Howard. Unfortunately, it's right at Don Kessinger. He gets Drysdale, has Horton Killebrew in freehand, no problems. Fly ball, pop-up, ground out. Bottom of the second, Tommy Helms doubles. Jerry Grody strikes out against Tiant. Don Kessinger strikes out. And then they bring up Don Drysdale. Now, in today's game, Drysdale would have never gone up. Either there would have been a pinch hitter, or I think sometimes they play with the DH. I tell you, they changed the rules so much. But Drysdale got in and hit a fly ball. Now, Drysdale was a pretty good hitter. So it wasn't really that crazy giving up with a runner in scoring position to have Drysdale come up. Once more, Drysdale gets Robinson, Hawk Harrelson, Ken Harrelson, and Jim Fregosi. Ground out, fly ball, ground out. Blue Moon replaces Ken Hawk Harrelson, pinch hitting and batting ninth. So he comes into the game and faces Willie Mays, Curt Flood, Willie McCovey. Ground out, strikeout. Juan Marichal comes up. He replaces Drysdale. So the California Coast doing their job. Carew, Yaz, Howard, ground out, strike out. I mean, this is how the game went. Blue Moon Odom, who would get burnt in Washington, D.C. the following year. Strikeout, walk, ground out. Walks go to Santo and Helms. Here's the thing about Ron Santo. Drew a ton of walks in his career. He would have been a great player. Great fielder, home run hitter, good RBI man, walk. Plus, pretty decent hitter, about 277 lifetime batting average. Actually, I apologize here. This is me being a knucklehead. Danny McLean does come into the game, but he doesn't start. I guess that was my big thing. McLean does not start the game. He did come into the game. And he faces Tom Haller, Willie Mays, Kurt Flood, McCovey. Fly ball, ground out, Flood walks, strikeout, Willie McCovey. So I apologize. Every once in a while, I know I get a lot wrong on the show, but I'm glad. And by the way, last week, I was talking about Willie Mays with the number of RBIs and stuff. I had included from the Negro Leagues a couple of those RBIs where I had said he had a 302 lifetime batting average, and I said it was 301. They did. Baseball Reference did include in his final stats any numbers he had with Birmingham in the Negro Leagues. So I just want to clear up one of those mistakes as well. Top of the sixth, Steve Carlton comes in, gets Robinson, Rick Monday, and Jim Fregosi. Fly ball, ground out, strikeout. You see a pattern here? Then, ready for this? Don Wirt hitting 200 for the season, playing shortstop for the Tigers. No, and third base. And is eventually, the big thing is that Mayo Smith moves Mickey Stanley to shortstop to get more offense in the 68 World Series. That way, Al Kaline, who had been hurt for most of the year, was able to play in his one and only World Series, and play he did, and had some big key hits in that 68 World Series. Another aside. I'm telling you right now, if you haven't watched the show before, you'll know I go off on tangents, but this is us sitting and talking nothing but sports, having a couple of brews, having a hamburger, and then realizing, wow, all these things are in my mind. I just want to get this out and just let you know. So I do go off on tangents. I apologize not, because I think it adds to just the flavor and just the deepness of sports discussion. Now, Pry McLean, get this, gives up a single to Hank Aaron. And Aaron never had great all-star games. In fact, his only 2 home runs occur in back-to-back all-star games late in his career. 1971, which I mentioned at Tiger Stadium, and then 72. He's one of the few guys that ever homered in his home park in an all-star game. And it was a big one because it was the first run of the game, I do believe, and then Cookie Rojas ties it, second baseman for the Royals, 1-1, and the National League goes on to win that game in extra innings, 3-2. And that game, I remember, it's played July 25th. Why? I was mad because it was played so late in the year. Because I'm saying, oh my goodness, next week starts August, and we're talking about going back to school. But anyway, Aaron gets on. Santo gets a walk. Aaron actually steals second, so they got a runner at second. Santo draws a walk. Tommy Helms, Rusty Staub, and Billy Williams. One of my favorite players. Here's a little stat about Billy Williams. Let me see if I can find. Billy Williams actually finished runner-up twice in the MVP, 1970 and 1972. Who did he finish behind? Johnny Bench. Johnny Bench hit 45, then 40 home runs, respectively, 70 and 72. I'm just going to keep showing these. Billy Williams probably had his greatest season in 72. I know that, I believe the Sporting News named him Player of the Year over Bench, because Bench was 40, 125, and I think he probably hit like 270. Williams hit 330. He bashed 37 homers. He had a ton of RBIs in both those years, 70 and 72. But Billy Williams pops up to right field. Nobody scores. Tom Seaver comes into the game. Let me just see here. Oh, here's more guys. Tom Seaver comes into the game in the 7th, gets Rod Carew, Carl Yastrzemski, Tony Oliva doubles. And then Joe Askew, making his only appearance in an All-Star game, strikes out to Seaver. Now, interestingly enough, in 1967, Seaver, as a rookie, is the winning pitcher in that All-Star game. This might be the last time that Seaver actually has a good All-Star game because he gets roasted. He gives up Carl Yastrzemski's only home run in an All-Star game at the 75 game in Milwaukee. That actually tied the game. He tied the game 3-3, and that was off Seaver. Then Seaver got hammered in Yankee Stadium. There's Tony Perez, Tom Haller. So Seaver had some good games, obviously a clutch performance in 67 as a rookie. Here he sets down the American League without too much trouble. I mean, Oliva doubled, but he got 2 strikeouts on a ground ball. Got Joe Askew on a strikeout. All right. Sam McDowell, I just saw him, comes into the game. Sudden Sam McDowell, who, of course, is part of the 1970 lore because I was looking at an article. Here's Sam McDowell. Look at this. ERA leaders. These are all stud pitchers. You have Louis Tiant, who probably should be in the Hall of Fame. Sam McDowell, who was a great pitcher. When he was on fire, he was a great pitcher. And Dave McNally, who was one of the anchors on that late 60s, early 70s Orioles team. And like I said, his really claim to fame was the fact that he successfully won his lawsuit and became a free agent, signed with the Expos, I believe, or the Expos won. I think he actually just retired from baseball. He moved back out to Montana, where he's originally from, Billings. But he was a significant player, which is why maybe, I'm even thinking this. Why not consider him for the Hall of Fame, or at least have him somehow, some way really be celebrated for what he did for the Players Union and for the players, and actually made the game better with the lawsuit. He and Messersmith. Okay, Willie Horton, another guy I didn't mention, and Dwayne Josephson. So anyway, Sam McDowell comes in, has to face Haller, strikes him out. Gets Willie Mays to strike out. Gives up a single to Matty Alou, who would start in center field and break Willie Mays' I believe, his streak of starting in center field for the National League. In 1969, Alou is in center field, bookended by Hank Aaron and Cleon Jones in left. But Matty Alou would be, he singles, and so that was the only problem that Sam McDowell would have in the bottom of the 7th, as he would get Willie McCovey, the great Willie McCovey, who would have his MVP All-Star game the following year in 69. This is why I'm saying this game is such a bridge to everything that really, when I'm thinking about it as a child, I really grew up with baseball. 69, he hits 2 home runs at DC and is named MVP in the game. Then in the 8th, Tom Seaver's still in there. Strikes out Boog Powell. And Boog, of course, is the 70 MVP for the American League. Really was, if you ever notice, my pet peeve with Boog Powell, watch him on some of the great plays that Brooks Robinson made in the 70 and 71 World Series. And he's leading with the wrong foot at first base, making a tougher play in reality for Brooks Robinson. And he was regarded as a pretty decent fielder, Boog. I love Boog. Anybody with the name of Boog Powell can't be all bad. 1970, he had a monster year. In 68, though, he was an all-star. He struck out against Seaver, and of course, they would clash again in 1969 in the World Series. And then here's a great trivia question. I just saw it. I didn't even realize it. Mickey Mantle comes up for the final time in the All-Star game. and strikes out against, you would consider, the icon of the New York Mets, the franchise. That's what he was nicknamed. So you have Mantle facing a very, I would say a very experienced, even though he has 2 years under his belt, including 68, Tom Seaver. Just a great pitcher. And Seaver strikes out the great Mantle in his final, in Mantle's final appearance in the All-Star game and in his final at bat. And then, adding irony to the whole thing, after getting Powell and Mantle, he gives up a double to Don Wert, the guy who hit 200 for the year. He gives up Don Wert a double. This is what happens sometimes. This is why it's incredible what happens in the game of baseball, which is why, nothing is ever a guarantee in baseball. But he gives up a double to Don Wert, but then gets Rick Monday on a strikeout. So Seaver, in his 2 innings, got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 guys to strike out, including Hall of Famer Yaz, including Hall of Famer Mantle, and including MVP Boog Powell. How's that? And then in the 8th inning, Mel Stottlemyre comes into the game. Now, Mel, of course, we've talked about Mel, had some great years with the Yankees, was on the 64 team with the Yankees, and probably, had he played, here's an interesting thing. Can you believe how good the Mets would have been had Stottlemyre pitched for the Mets? Can you imagine that Mets staff? Seaver, Stottlemyre, Koosman. Can you imagine if somehow the Mets, Stottlemyre winding up in New York, but on the National League team, how great that Met pitching staff would have been? I mean, Stottlemyre was a really good pitcher. He just played for the crummy Yankees of those late 60s. I mean, I'm saying that with a smile because I hated those Yankees. Still do. So those are my favorite. That's the Yankee dynasty I like to talk about. The ones that were always mediocre. Those are enjoyable for me. Don't be mad, you Yankee fans. But Seaver gets Mickey Mantle. And I didn't want to get – I was going to get a 68 card, but I remember these as a kid. They were trading cards or even a deck of cards. And Mickey Mantle has a single. Interesting, they give Mickey Mantle a single but not a home run, right? Known for the home run. Probably Matty Alou, if he was playing in the game, they'd probably give him a home run instead of a single. But can you imagine? Stottlemyre comes into the game and gets Hank Aaron on a strikeout. Gives up a single to Ron Santo and gets Tommy Helms that hit into a ground ball double play. Now, in the last inning, Ron Reed comes into the game in the top of the 9th. Now, according to this, he's a rookie. And he comes into the game. Johnny Bench replaces Tom Haller, who had replaced, I do believe, Jerry Grody. And here it is. And I do believe, like I said, I was wrong with McClain. I didn't realize he actually pitched in the game. So I apologize on that. But Bob Gibson is not in the game. And ready for this, Ron Reed gets Bert Campanellis on a ground out. Gets Davey Johnson, future Met, and also a guy who would be traded later on and hit 43 home runs for the Atlanta Braves in 1973. Davey Johnson strikes out. Jerry Koosman replaces Ron Reed to face Carl Yaz. So it's a lefty-lefty. And Red Shaney's, you got to say he was brilliant. Yaz strikes out to end the game. No runs, no hits, no errors. Nobody left on base. National League wins the game 1-0. In this game, ready? There were 20 strikeouts of the 51 ounce. Kind of like today. Only 1 run, unearned. So the ERA for both teams was 0.00. That's a first in All-Star history. And, ready for this? Only 3 hits. Jim Fergosi to start the game, Tony Oliva, both both hit doubles, and actually Don Wirtz. So all three hits by the American League were doubles. I didn't realize that until I started going through this. And for the National League, Tommy Helms had a double, but he also hit into a double play. Willie Mays hit into a double play. Only 4 extra base hits in the game. By the way, the Astro was Rusty Staub, who would be a starter for the Tigers in 1976 in the All-Star game. He was one of the RBI leaders, if not the RBI leader, in 1976 in the American League, after the Mets kind of gave up on him. He was an All-Star for the expansion Expos for the Astros. I always wanted him to be a All-Star for the Mets as well, because I think the record is 2. Ron Fairley did it for the Blue Jays and the Expos. I can't think of anybody else. Oh, Don Mincher was technically an All-Star for Seattle, and because he was named late, Mike Hegan was hurt, so he made it for them and the Angels. I don't think he was, well, if he was with Minnesota, an All-Star, maybe 65, it was because the team moved. So there's another 2 guys. But why I wanted to bring this up is that you can see in 68, there is definitely a shifting of the guard. First of all, you have the Orioles with Davey Johnson and Boog Powell coming in. Let me just go through this. In 68, the Orioles would be getting primed. So they would have 2 of their 3, actually, Brooks Robinson. I didn't get a picture of him. So you have 3 of your 4 infielders from the Orioles. Frank Robinson wasn't on the team. Can you believe that? Doesn't make the All-Star team. This is what I mean about this. There was a lot of new faces. But when you look at this new faces, look at what you're getting. So you're getting the 3/4 of the Oriole infield, which would come to dominate 69, 70, 71. You would get a number of great Oakland A's players. John Blue Monum, who would be a big help in their push to the World Series wins 72, 73, 74. Bert Campaneris, who would anchor the infield playing shortstop. And Rick Monday, who would be used, unfortunately, in trade to get Billy North and Ken Holtzman. You have the beginnings of the Big Red Machine with Tony Perez, Johnny Bench, Tommy Helms, who would be traded for the great Joe Morgan, who didn't make this team. All right, you would have the 2 great pitchers for the Mets in this, plus their great catcher, Jerry Grody, Koosman, and Seaver, who would show what they could do in 1969. There's a lot of moving parts here. You would see the end of the Yankees symbolically with Mickey Mantle striking out against the up and the rising up the franchise, Tom Seaver, in their head-to-head battle in late in the game. You'd see that this game won still by the greatest player in the last 70 years, Willie Mays, but not winning it with his bat this time, not winning it with his glove, but winning it with his speed, his acumen, and his base running instincts to give the National League their only run in a 1-0 All-Star game, 1968, in the Astrodome, Houston, Texas. This is Will O'Toole. Everyone enjoy the summer. We'll be back in the fall. Shout out to Howard. Everyone have a great summer. Thank you for joining us. Be back in September.